There's a version of you that was shaped before you ever had a choice, before you knew how to speak your needs, before you understood the meaning of safety. You were already learning who you had to be in order to survive. And somewhere along the way, parts of you, your voice, your confidence, your joy, were left behind. Not because you were weak, but because your nervous system chose silence over conflict and hiding over harm. What if the fear you feel today isn't really about what's in front of you, but what's still unresolved behind you? What if the anxiety, the self-doubt, the constant overthinking are echoes of a childhood that never felt fully seen, heard, or protected? This isn't just about pain, it's about pattern. It's about how the mind protects itself from what it can't explain. And until we bring those hidden stories into the light, we'll keep living them, again and again, calling them fate, when really they're just unhealed memories. In this journey, we're not looking for blame. We're looking for understanding, because once you understand why you've been stuck, you're finally free to move. Not away from your past, but through it, towards something whole, something real, something that was always yours. When we think about who we are today, our behaviors, emotions, fears, even the way we love, it's easy to believe it all comes from conscious choices. But beneath those decisions lies something much older, much quieter, and far more powerful: our childhood experiences. Carl Jung believed that our early life, especially moments of emotional pain, confusion, or neglect, creates what he called an invisible blueprint. This blueprint shapes how we see the world, how we see others, and how we see ourselves. Childhood isn't just a chapter of life. It's the foundation of our personality. When something traumatic happens at a young age, whether it's abandonment, emotional neglect, harsh criticism, or even just not being seen or heard, it doesn't just go away. Instead, it quietly embeds itself into our unconscious mind. Jung believed the unconscious holds all these forgotten or repressed experiences, and even though we can't see them clearly, they influence every decision we make. Think of it like this: if your heart was broken as a child by someone who should have protected you, you may grow up with a deep fear of trusting others. You may even push people away, not because you want to, but because something deep inside you believes it's safer to be alone. That belief doesn't come from reason, it comes from trauma. Jung believed these early patterns become part of what he called the complexes, emotional clusters formed around unresolved pain. And these complexes silently run in the background, like invisible programs dictating your responses to life. Many of us spend our adult lives reacting to things without fully understanding why. Why does a small criticism feel like a personal attack? Why do we fear abandonment even when we're in loving relationships? The answer often lies in our earliest experiences. Jung didn't just see childhood trauma as a psychological issue. He saw it as a spiritual wound, one that touches the very core of who we are. But here's what makes this so profound. Jung didn't think trauma was a dead end. In fact, he believed it held the key to transformation. By becoming aware of this invisible blueprint, by turning our attention inward and gently facing those early wounds, we begin the process of healing. Jung's work teaches us that the unconscious isn't our enemy. It's a forgotten part of us that longs to be seen, heard, and integrated. Often children don't have the words or tools to process pain. Instead of understanding what happened, they internalize it. A child who is constantly criticized might not think, "My parent is projecting their pain onto me." Instead, they think, "I'm not good enough." That belief then becomes a silent truth they carry into adulthood. It affects their self-worth, relationships, and even their goals. They're following a script they never agreed to write, but one that's been programmed deeply into them. Jung believed that these early wounds don't just disappear with time. They remain buried, often influencing behavior in strange and subtle ways. This is why some people, no matter how successful they become, still feel unworthy or why others continually attract toxic relationships. It's not because they want to suffer, it's because the unconscious is trying to replay the old story, hoping for a different ending. But unless we become conscious of that story, we're doomed to repeat it. Understanding this doesn't mean we blame our parents or caregivers endlessly. Many of them were carrying their own invisible blueprints. The cycle of trauma is generational, but what Jung gave us is a chance to stop that cycle, but not just for ourselves, but for future generations. When we choose to become aware of our early wounds, when we stop ignoring the pain and start exploring it, we begin to rewrite our story. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This quote perfectly captures the essence of how childhood trauma shapes our reality. It doesn't just stay in the past, it becomes the lens through which we see everything in the present. But that lens can be cleared, that blueprint can be rewritten, and it begins by understanding that our past doesn't have to define us. It informs us, yes, it leaves marks, yes, but it also offers us a map, a hidden guide to the parts of ourselves that need love, care, and attention. By following that map with compassion and curiosity, we don't just revisit the pain, we begin to reclaim our power. There are parts of ourselves we show to the world, our smile, our strengths, our polite responses. But then there are parts we keep hidden, the anger we feel but never express, the sadness we swallow, the shame we try to forget. Carl Jung called this hidden side of us the shadow. It is where we store all the pieces of ourselves that we were told were too much, too wrong, or too shameful to be accepted. When a child is scolded for crying, they may learn that sadness is weakness. When they are punished for being angry, they may bury that anger deep inside. Over time, these emotions and traits don't disappear. They get pushed into the unconscious, into the shadow. The shadow becomes a kind of emotional basement, holding all the parts of the self that were rejected, not just by others, but eventually by the self. Jung believed that the shadow is formed largely in childhood, especially when a child is traumatized, criticized, or forced to suppress their true feelings to survive or be accepted. If a child grows up in a home where love is conditional, they learn to become who they think they must be to earn approval and hide everything else. The result? A divided self. One part lives on the surface trying to be perfect. The other part, hurt, angry, confused, gets buried out of sight, but not out of influence. What we don't realize is that the shadow doesn't stay silent forever. It leaks out through jealousy, through outbursts, through self-sabotage. When we say, "I don't know why I did that," or "that's not like me," we're often meeting our shadow. It's not that we're broken, it's that there's a part of us that was never allowed to speak, and now it's trying to be heard. The shadow is especially important when we talk about childhood trauma. That's because trauma doesn't just wound us, it teaches us to disown the parts of ourselves that were affected. A child who was made to feel weak for crying may grow into an adult who fears vulnerability and rejects any sign of emotion in themselves and others. But the rejected feelings don't disappear. They go underground, and from there they quietly shape our choices, relationships, and sense of self. Jung wasn't afraid of the shadow. He saw it as essential to becoming whole. He believed that healing comes not by ignoring these hidden parts, but by facing them. The journey to healing from childhood trauma begins when we stop running from our shadow and start listening to it. This doesn't mean giving in to destructive impulses, it means understanding where they come from. That jealousy might be a sign of buried insecurity. That anger might be a voice that was silenced long ago. That fear of intimacy could be the voice of a child who learned that love is dangerous. By facing the shadow, we begin to make sense of these emotions, and we reclaim the parts of ourselves we were forced to abandon. Many people fear their shadow because they think it's dark, evil, or shameful. But in truth, the shadow also holds your strength. It holds your creativity, your intuition, your raw emotion, and your capacity to love deeply. These parts were only hidden because someone once told you they weren't okay. Jung believed that to become truly whole, we must integrate the shadow, not destroy it, not escape it, but bring it into the light. That process is called shadow work. It involves gentle reflection, emotional honesty, and self-compassion. It means asking yourself, what am I hiding? What parts of me have I rejected? What do I feel ashamed of? And then meeting those parts not with judgment, but with curiosity, with love. You see, healing from childhood trauma isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the pain taught you to hide. The shadow holds the keys to that original self, that child who once felt freely, dreamed openly, and trusted the world before the trauma taught them to shrink. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's what the shadow asks of us, not to fear it, but to acknowledge it. Because the more we understand what we've hidden, the more power we have to choose our future, rather than being trapped in the past. So if you've ever wondered why you feel blocked, lost, or disconnected, it might be time to look not outside, but within, to listen to the voice you silenced long ago, and to know this: your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your wounded self asking to come home. Every human carries a story that began before we could even speak. In Jungian psychology, this story lives within us as archetypes, universal patterns or symbols that shape how we experience life. Among these, two of the most powerful are the inner child and the wounded parent. They are not just metaphors. They are living energies within the unconscious, especially impacted by childhood trauma. The inner child is the part of you that remembers what it felt like to be innocent, curious, playful, and also vulnerable, scared and alone. It's the part of your psyche that holds on to the feelings and memories from your early years. This inner child carries both your purest joys and your deepest wounds. When trauma happens, especially when we're young and emotionally unguarded, the child inside doesn't forget. Even if our conscious mind tries to move on, the inner child stays frozen in those moments of confusion, fear, or abandonment. Carl Jung believed that archetypes are inherited structures of the psyche, and the inner child is a vital one. When trauma strikes, this archetype doesn't develop properly. It becomes stuck in distress. It might show up in your adult life as irrational fears, sudden emotional reactions, or a constant need for validation. You may feel like you're acting out of proportion to a situation, but really it's your inner child responding, trying to protect itself the only way it knows how. On the other side of this psychological equation is the wounded parent. This isn't necessarily your actual mother or father, it's the internalized version of them. As children, we absorb our caregivers' voices, behaviors, and energy into our unconscious. If those caregivers were nurturing, that inner parent becomes a source of guidance and strength. But if they were abusive, absent, or emotionally unavailable, the parent archetype within us becomes damaged. It criticizes us. It shames us. It repeats the same patterns we once tried to escape. So here's what happens. The inner child feels hurt, and the wounded parent within us reinforces that pain. You might hear that voice in your head that says, "You're not good enough," or "Why can't you just get it right?" That's not your true voice. It's the echo of what was once said to you, and it plays on repeat, keeping you in a cycle of pain, self-doubt, and emotional instability. This inner dynamic can be especially damaging because it often works in the shadows. Most people don't even realize these archetypes are running their emotional life. They just feel exhausted, broken, or stuck in unhealthy relationships. But what they're really experiencing is a silent inner conflict, a child longing for love and a parent figure within who has forgotten how to give it. Jung taught that healing comes from becoming conscious of these inner roles and starting to change the script. You don't have to keep obeying the wounded parent within. You can become what Jung called the self, the integrated whole version of yourself that can parent your own inner child with compassion, wisdom, and love. Imagine going back to that younger version of you, not to relive the pain, but to hold them in a way no one ever did, to tell them, you didn't deserve what happened to you. You're not broken. You were always worthy of love. This act may sound simple, but it's deeply transformative. It begins to heal the trauma where it lives, in the unconscious mind. Archetypes don't disappear, but they can evolve. The wounded parent can become the wise inner guide. The scared inner child can become the creative inner force. But this doesn't happen automatically. It happens when we engage in conscious inner work, through therapy, journaling, reflection, or even guided visualization. By facing these archetypes, understanding their origins, and rewriting their roles, we slowly begin to rebuild a more nurturing and grounded inner world. And this is where Jung's genius truly shines. He didn't just explain why we suffer, he showed us how to heal. He believed that our psyche is not broken but layered. Every painful layer hides something meaningful. The inner child carries your lost joy. The wounded parent holds the wisdom of your survival, and between them lies the chance for transformation. So if you've ever felt like you're fighting yourself, or loving people who treat you like your past did, understand this. It's not a weakness, it's a message. It's your inner child and wounded parent calling for healing, not blame. And when you answer that call, not only do you begin to rewrite your story, you become the author of your future. Sometimes we meet someone new and instantly dislike them, and we're not even sure why. Other times we put someone on a pedestal, believing they're perfect, only to be disappointed later. Moments like these may seem random, but they're not. Carl Jung explained them using a powerful psychological concept called projection. It's when we unknowingly cast parts of our own inner world onto the people around us, especially parts we haven't fully understood or accepted. Projection happens when we take feelings, beliefs, or qualities we have buried deep within ourselves, often from painful childhood experiences, and see them in others instead. If we were shamed for expressing anger as children, we might grow up believing that anger is wrong. But that anger doesn't disappear. It hides in our unconscious. And so, when we meet someone who is loud or assertive, we might immediately judge them, not because of who they are, but because they remind us of something we've repressed in ourselves. Jung believed projection is one of the main ways the unconscious reveals itself. In fact, he said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That means the very people who trigger us might be mirrors, reflecting the parts of us we have not yet faced. Childhood trauma makes projection even more intense. If you grew up in a home where love was unpredictable, you might constantly fear abandonment, even in secure relationships. You might assume your partner is pulling away when they're simply busy. That fear isn't about the present, it's a projection of the past. The child in you is still waiting to be left. Or perhaps you were raised by a parent who was never satisfied with you. As an adult, you may project that same critical voice onto your boss, your friends, or even your spouse, hearing judgment where there is none, because your mind is wired to expect it. This doesn't mean your feelings aren't real. They are. But they may not always come from the here and now. They come from emotional memories silently steering your present reality. Projection doesn't only show up in negative ways. Sometimes we project our best qualities onto others too. We might admire someone for being brave when really it's our own courage we haven't fully owned. This is called positive projection, and it can be just as revealing. When we recognize traits in others that we deeply desire, it's often a sign that those qualities are sleeping within us, waiting to be awakened. Jung taught that the goal of life isn't to eliminate projection, it's to become aware of it. Because once we see it, we can take back our power. We stop blaming others for emotions they didn't create. We begin to understand that some of our reactions have less to do with what's happening now, and more to do with old wounds that haven't yet healed. This awareness is not about guilt or shame. It's about insight. It's about noticing patterns and gently asking ourselves, what part of me am I seeing in this person? What does this situation remind me of? Is this reaction truly about now, or is it from then? One of the most powerful things you can do is begin to see the world through this lens, not to overanalyze, but to grow. Projection is like a flashlight showing us where the shadow is still active. If someone constantly irritates you, that's not a weakness. It's an invitation to look inward. If you find yourself repeating the same arguments with different people, that's not bad luck. It's your unconscious asking to be seen. Through this process, we begin what Jung called integration, bringing the unconscious into the conscious mind. And as we do, we stop living life through the filter of the past. We begin to see people for who they are, not just who they remind us of. We communicate better. We love more clearly. We suffer less. Healing from childhood trauma involves many steps, but one of the most transformative is learning to recognize when your mind is projecting the past onto the present. Because once you can pause, reflect, and shift your perspective, you are no longer trapped by old stories. You are choosing a new response, a new reality. In a way, projection shows us what still needs love. The angry person we judge might point to our own suppressed frustration. The clingy partner we push away might reflect our own fear of abandonment. When we stop blaming the mirror and start exploring the reflection, we finally begin to meet ourselves, not the version shaped by trauma, but the one ready to grow beyond it. When we fall asleep, our waking mind takes a rest, but the deeper parts of us begin to speak. Through dreams, the unconscious mind reveals what we often ignore during the day. And for those who carry childhood trauma, dreams aren't just strange stories or random images. They are messages, symbols of the pain we haven't yet faced and the healing we secretly long for. Carl Jung believed dreams are the language of the unconscious. He didn't think dreams were meaningless or just brain activity. Instead, he saw them as powerful metaphors. They are how the deeper self tries to get our attention. And often, when there's unresolved trauma from childhood, the unconscious uses dreams to symbolically replay, reinterpret, or reprocess those early experiences. A dream may show you running through a dark forest, chased by something you can't see. This isn't just a nightmare. It might represent the fear you felt as a child, the fear you were never allowed to express. Or maybe you dream of being abandoned in a crowd, shouting for someone who doesn't hear you. That's not just anxiety. It might be the emotional memory of being neglected or ignored when you were young. The unconscious doesn't speak in plain words. It speaks in symbols, colors, emotions, places, and characters. Jung called these recurring elements archetypes, universal patterns that show up across cultures and time. In dreams, these archetypes can take the form of animals, children, wise elders, dark shadows, or mysterious strangers. And each one represents something within you. For example, a wounded child in a dream might be your inner child asking for your attention. A strict, cold figure could represent the internalized voice of a critical parent. Water might symbolize deep emotion. A house might represent the psyche itself. Different rooms reflecting different parts of your mental world. When something in the house is broken or locked, it could suggest parts of your mind that are shut off due to trauma. Jung believed that if we pay attention to our dreams, we can begin to understand the silent language of our suffering. Dreams don't lie. They don't protect your ego. They reveal the truth, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully. And when you learn to listen, you may uncover emotions you didn't even know you were carrying. But here's the beautiful part. Dreams don't only show pain, they also guide you toward healing. A dream about climbing a mountain or finding a hidden door can reflect your desire to grow, to explore the parts of yourself you've kept hidden. A sudden appearance of light, a helping hand, or a bridge over water may symbolize the readiness of your unconscious to begin the healing journey. Trauma hides itself in the unconscious because that's where it's safest. As children, we can't always face the truth of what happened to us, so our minds bury it. But over time, the unconscious starts knocking, gently asking, "Are you ready to look?" That knocking often comes in the form of dreams, and while they may seem confusing or frightening at first, they are a deeply personal invitation to begin reconnecting with the parts of ourselves we've abandoned. Jung often said that analyzing dreams is like decoding a message from the soul. He encouraged people to journal their dreams, explore recurring images, and reflect on how they felt, not just what happened, because feelings are the key. The emotion in the dream tells you where the wound is. If you dream about trying to speak but no one hears you, ask yourself, when in your life did you feel invisible? If you dream about being lost, ask, when did I lose a sense of safety? If you dream about a parent or caregiver acting cold, strict, or distant, that might be your mind revisiting a dynamic it hasn't healed from yet. You don't need to be an expert to understand your dreams. You just need to be curious and gentle. The images your unconscious shows you are part of your healing path. By exploring them, you're beginning to meet your pain, not through logic, but through story, through symbol, through soul. So next time a dream leaves you shaken or confused, don't dismiss it. Ask yourself, what part of me is this dream showing? What might it be trying to heal? Because behind every symbol, behind every shadow in your dreams, there's a deeper truth. Your mind wants to heal. Your soul wants to be whole. And even in sleep, it's reaching out to guide you home. There comes a moment in life when the pain becomes too loud to ignore, when no distraction, success, or relationship can silence the ache inside. That moment, though deeply uncomfortable, marks the beginning of something powerful, what Carl Jung called individuation. It's not just about healing trauma, it's about becoming your whole self. And that journey starts by turning inward and facing the parts of yourself you've long been afraid to see. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who your trauma shaped you into, but your complete and integrated self. Jung believed that each of us carries within us both a conscious self, the part we identify with, and an unconscious world made up of everything we've forgotten, repressed, or denied. These two parts are often at war, especially for those who experienced pain early in life. Childhood trauma can split the self. To survive emotionally, children often disconnect from certain feelings or traits. Maybe you learned to be quiet instead of expressive, obedient instead of authentic, or strong instead of vulnerable. These sacrifices helped you survive, but they also left parts of you behind. Individuation is the process of going back and reclaiming what was lost, Not just the pain, but the beauty, the creativity, the emotion, and the essence of who you were before the world told you to change. This journey begins when we stop running from the unconscious and start exploring it. The unconscious isn't just a dark place filled with repressed memories. It's also a wellspring of wisdom. It holds the answers to why you feel blocked, why you repeat the same relationship patterns, why you fear rejection or failure. But it also holds your potential, your dreams, your imagination, and your true voice. To face the unconscious is to meet your shadow, to comfort your inner child, and to challenge the wounded parent within. These aren't abstract concepts, they're real emotional energies that influence your thoughts and decisions every single day. And when you begin to dialogue with them through journaling, therapy, introspection, or dream work, you begin to understand yourself in a way you never have before. One of the most important aspects of individuation is integration. Jung believed that healing isn't about eliminating your pain or becoming perfect. It's about integrating all parts of yourself into a cohesive whole. That includes the joy and the sorrow, the strength and the sensitivity, the adult and the child. When you deny parts of yourself, you live in conflict. But when you accept all of who you are, you live in peace. This process isn't linear. It's not something you complete in a weekend or even a year. It unfolds slowly, layer by layer, moment by moment. Sometimes it feels like progress, other times like regression. But each time you choose to face your feelings instead of running from them, each time you show compassion to your wounded parts instead of criticizing them, you take another step forward on the path to wholeness. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That's what individuation offers. Not a life without pain, but a life where your pain no longer defines you. A life where you understand your triggers, not just react to them. A life where your past informs your growth instead of limiting it. For many, the idea of facing the unconscious is frightening. We've been taught to avoid discomfort, to stay distracted, to stay strong, but strength isn't the absence of pain. It's the willingness to feel it, to hold it, to walk through it with open eyes and an open heart. That's what individuation asks of you. Not perfection, but presence. Not judgment, but curiosity. As you continue this journey, you may begin to notice changes. You respond to conflict with more clarity. You recognize when you're projecting old wounds. You make choices that align with your values, not your fears. This isn't magic, it's maturity. It's what happens when your inner world starts to harmonize with your outer life. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. It's about peeling back the layers of survival and meeting the authentic self underneath. And that self is not broken, it is whole, it is wise. And it has been waiting for you to return. There comes a time, after all the pain, the confusion, and the searching, when we begin to ask not, "Why did this happen to me?" but instead, "What can I become because of it?" That moment marks the true beginning of transformation. Carl Jung believed that within every wound lies a seed of power, and the journey through trauma is not just about recovery, it's about reclaiming your wholeness and becoming something more than you ever imagined. When we carry the weight of childhood trauma, we often feel shattered, like pieces of ourselves have been lost along the way. Parts of us feel stuck in the past, frozen in fear or shame, disconnected from our joy, our voice, and our inner light. But Jung's work reminds us that these broken parts are not gone. They are waiting to be seen, heard, and brought back into the circle of the self. You see, trauma doesn't just cause pain, it creates division. It splits us from who we really are. And the path to healing isn't about forgetting the trauma or pretending it didn't shape us. It's about integrating what was broken, turning the wound into wisdom, and allowing it to deepen our humanity rather than shrink it. That's the real power behind Jung's approach. He didn't ask us to run from our darkness. He asked us to walk into it because that's where our strength lives. As you face your trauma, you begin to recognize its patterns, so you notice how fear disguised itself as control, how anger masked the ache of being unseen, how your silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. And as you uncover these truths, something begins to shift. What once felt like chaos starts to reveal a deeper order. You begin to realize that your reactions, your defenses, your struggles, they all made sense in the context of your story. They were attempts to stay safe. This awareness isn't just comforting, it's liberating, because now with consciousness, you get to choose differently. You don't have to live on autopilot. You don't have to keep repeating what was done to you. You can step out of the old scripts and write something new, something true, something whole. This is the essence of post-traumatic growth, what Jung would call psychological transformation. It's not about becoming who you were before the trauma. It's about becoming someone wiser, deeper, more compassionate because of it. Your pain, once faced and integrated, becomes your power, your empathy, your intuition, your courage. It teaches you to see others more clearly, to connect more authentically, to live more freely. Jung often spoke of the self as the goal of inner development. Not the ego, not the mask we wear for the world, but the true self that holds all of our parts, even the wounded ones. As you move through the process of healing, you begin to embody this self more fully. You stop seeing yourself as damaged and start seeing yourself as complex, as layered, as beautifully human. And something else happens too. You begin to forgive, not because what happened was okay, but because you no longer want to carry the weight of it. Forgiveness in this sense isn't about the other person. It's about your freedom. It's about choosing to no longer let the past control the present. It's about reclaiming your energy and redirecting it toward who you want to become. Reclaiming wholeness means honoring your story, not erasing it. It means understanding that every scar holds a lesson. Every tear held truth. Every breakdown carved space for breakthrough. Jung once said, "Only the wounded physician heals." This means that our greatest capacity to help others, to love deeply, to live with wisdom, comes not from avoiding pain, but from surviving it with awareness. So what does it mean to transform trauma into power? It means stepping into your life with conscious intention. It means setting boundaries where there were none. Speaking truths you once silenced. Choosing relationships that nourish instead of wound. And most importantly, treating yourself with the love, care, and respect that you always deserved, but maybe never received. You are not just someone who is hurt. You are someone who is healing, someone who has the courage to face what most people run from. That is strength, that is grace, and that is the beginning of real freedom. The journey is not easy, but it is worth it, because on the other side of your pain is not just peace, it's power. Not just survival, but transformation. And not just a return to who you were, but a becoming of who you were always meant to be.